Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first meeting of the Development and Planning Applications Committee. My name's Councilor Monday, I'm the chair. For those in the room here, we have no fire drills planned tonight, so if you do hear the alarm, do run with us outside. The agenda will be taken as in the order, and we'll aim to take the last item of business no later than around 11:30, and take a short break after approximately an hour and a half because of, obviously the weather has played an impact on that. So those in the room, please do take water at the front if it is very hot. And I'll just outline the process for those who are new here, but also those online as well. So each of the items follow the same process. So it is an officer presentation, presents an application, and may reference the modification sheet that's available online. And then residents will address the committee for up to 3 minutes each, then ward councillors for 2 minutes each, then the applicant and agent who have up to 6 minutes in total, then the cabinet member for 2 minutes. Finally, officers may respond and reference again previous answers in the from technical briefing or the modification sheet. We'll then open the floor to questions from the committee, normally done 2 at a time. And the committee may ask the applicant or anyone who spoke previously a question by myself to clarify a previous response or expand on an element which is in the documentation in front of us. We'll then move the committee to general sort of observations and comments. We may need to debate or agree additional conditions or informatives as needed. And then we'll move to the vote on the recommendation in the order voting against, not voting, voting for. Is that all understood? Super. So with that in mind, we'll move on to the agenda. So just to flag that we've had a private session prior to the start of this committee for mandatory training, because all members of the Planning Applications Committee, before they come and deliberate on an application, must have an annual round of training, and that was delivered by our Head of Planning and Development, John Berry. So can I get any apologies for absence? I think we've got Simon McGrath, who apologies, and we've got Susie Hicks subbing. Fantastic. And any declarations of pecuniary interest? Miriam?
Yes, I have a declaration of pecuniary interest on item 7, the Eddie Katz application, where I worked in the same vicinity as one of the speakers, but I've been advised that I'm clear to make a decision on this application.
Fantastic. Thank you for raising that. And yeah, I don't see any issue with you continuing to inform us on this application. So thank you very much. Minutes from the previous meeting. Councillor Hicks, do you want to raise the point you've emailed to me? Mike.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Yes, it was the cycle lane at page 9. I think we're now going to ask for an update on that. Keep the pressure on that front. So I've been contacted by local residents who are very concerned that it should happen, and I hope it does. But the minutes themselves don't need to be amended on that point if we're going to definitely do that. And the other one was in relation to page 11, in relation to parking permits for people with disabilities. The condition as it's set doesn't cover that factor, so we need to amend it. So it includes, my recollection was a condition to allow an exemption for any disabled student who needs a car to be able to apply.
Thank you. I mean, working backwards, I do remember we made that point very clear to them on the off chance that that were to happen, they must accommodate their terms of residence to allow that. So I mean, if colleagues would agree, I think we can update the line that talks about the applicant submitting the residency agreement to include that clause. Brilliant. And in terms of your reference to page 9, I think we've got the cabinet member here who I know spoke very supportively, but I would be definitely keen to get an update, at least via email, if not to the committee, about the progress of that. And I think wider on the conditions we do apply to applications to make sure that they are enforced. And if there are any issues, we always hear back that what is the modifications to deliver the outcome that we wanted. But thank you. So take that as updated. Any further updates? With that suggestion included, can I take them as a full and accurate account of the meeting? Thank you very much. So on to our first application. So that is the High Path Estate. This is an outline plan application. So I would ask AWAT to introduce the item, but it may also want to describe for those here and online the difference between outline and full as well for full context. AWAT, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, and to the public. Tonight, what's presented to members is the High Path revised outline plan application for phases 4 to 7B. This proposed outline plan application relating to phases 4 to 7B only following approval of the extant outline permission that was supported by PAC in 2018 and approved in 2019. The proposal has been developed following extensive one-year-long pre-planning workshop meetings to reach this current outline scheme, which commenced back in January 2020. This proposal is the subject of substantial internal consultations, including dialogue with local residents, GLA, and TfL officers. Following extensive discussions with the applicant, the proposal was submitted on December 2022. During the application process, officers sent over 1,000 letters to residents within and around the estate. 3 representations had been received, as set out in the committee report. This proposal represents a form of development which would be acceptable in providing improved quality of homes, a new neighborhood park, improved cycle, pedestrian, and vehicular access, high standard public realm, landscaping, and non-residential and community spaces. Councillors may be aware that the High Path Estate is linked with the regeneration of both Eastfields and Ravensbury for development viability purposes. This outline plan application that is brought forward this evening before members is, as again, phases 4 to 7B, which proposes a total of 1,651 new homes, most of which were already assessed under the application approved in 2019. We would like to focus members' attention on the uplift between the original approved permission and this proposed development, which comprises up to 568 new homes as part of the maximum parameter scheme, providing a minimum of 40% affordable homes. Once the development at High Path is complete, within circa 15 years' time, the total number of homes that would be provided across phases 1 to 7B would comprise 2,227 homes. This proposal for outline plan application is presented to members in the very earliest stages of the High Path Estate regeneration, with the reserved matters to follow and development program of 15 years. The reserved matters for phase 4 is expected before PAC in 2027. The estate extends across 6.91 hectares. The application site is bounded between Merton High Street, Abbey Road to the east, Merton High Street to the north, Abbey Road to the east, High Path to the south, and Morden Road in the west. The Grade 2 listed South Wimbledon Underground Station is located to the northwest of the site, while the south of High Path is locally listed St. John's Church and Merton Abbey Primary School. The estate is made up of 608 residential units, a small portion of commercial and community uses, some open play spaces, and about 422 car parking spaces, excluding garages and driveways. The residential units consist of a mix of social, rented, and private ownership as a result of right to buy. The affordable homes are in social rent and affordable 10-year split. The revised outline plan application is an illustrative application that seeks outline approval for buildings ranging from 4 stories up to 13 stories. The revised outline application will be incorporated by increased heights of blocks within key areas that allow flexibility in height increase and are supported by Merton's Estate local plan adopted in 2018 and the current London Plan 2021. The heights of the proposal have changed in the new outline application. Some have reduced in certain areas, and whilst others have increased, taking into consideration the neighbouring surrounding context and the relationship between other buildings and open spaces. This has been undertaken in accordance again with the Merton's Estate's local plan. The height of the proposal has changed. Sorry, apologies. The height increase will range between 1 to 3 stories, located on the northeast, midwest, and southwest sections of the estate. The estate will be built in a phase, with phase 1 having already been built and occupied, and phase 2 expected to commence development very soon. And the reserve matters application for phases 3B and 3C, which is situated behind South Wimbledon Station, has been submitted and is pending decision. Members should note that should outline plan application be approved for revised outline application phases 4 to 7, then a future planning committee would, planning committee would be asked to approve planning applications for reserve matters to determine all the details of each phase. Phase 4 again is programmed for submission in 2027. This slide brings us on to the land use plan. The proposal would deliver up to 5,000 square meters of commercial non-residential uses within phases 4 to 7B. When combined with earlier phases, the total non-residential use within the master plan would be 7,200 square meters. This slide demonstrates the open space and landscaping view. In line with previous master plan connecting Merton High Street and High Path, there will be a 7,500 square meter neighbourhood park over 60 meter wide through the middle of the estate, as well as additional associated landscaping in the form of communal courtyards, private gardens, and public realm. This slide looks at the vehicle and pedestrian cycle provision. The revised master plan includes associated highways and utility works, 361 car parking spaces, 286 of which will be in phases 4 to 7B, and over 2,970 residential and visitor cycle parking spaces will be provided. This would provide short and long stay cycle parking provision in accordance with London Plan Policy T5. The next 4 slides provides computer generated images of the illustrative master plan for phases 4 to 7B. The development plan as a whole supports the proposed intensification of the site as part of Merton's Estate regeneration project for High Path Estate. The London Plan 2021 recognises High Path is an intensification site. The principle of development was supported in the extant provision and has been carefully and sensitive. And the additional phases 4 to 7 has been applied as careful and sensitive addition to the proposal that accords with the objectives of the Merton Estates local plan, which was adopted in 2018 and the current London plan. Officers have engaged and carefully considered representations from those likely to be affected by the proposals, and through a design process have identified ways of addressing or mitigating such impacts to an acceptable level and through the imposition of planning conditions. The proposal provides opportunity to develop this key growth area and secure high quality affordable homes whilst improving urban design, public realm, open space, play space, and community space. The scheme would provide a positive contribution to the economic, social, and environmental well-being of the existing residents of the estate and the surrounding neighbouring environment. In view of the development plan policies, guidance set in the National Planning Policy Framework 2021, and an assessment of all other material planning considerations, officers are satisfied that the proposed scheme has met in principle the requirements for a development of this size scale in relation to planning issues. Taking into account the consistency of the scheme with the development plan as a whole and weighing this against material planning considerations, the proposal is considered to be acceptable in planning terms. Officers' recommendation is therefore to grant outline planning permission, subject to conditions, referral to GLA, and completion of variation section 106. Thank you, Chair, members.
Thank you, Awat. So thank you very much. Really, really helpful to go through that, of course. So can I now ask for residents to address the committee for 3 minutes each? I think we're starting with, is that Alexander Forbes? Are they available? Yep, Alexander, thank you. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. My objection to the application on page 16, 1.110, the principle of demolition, development and land uses were considered acceptable in the extent planning permission. My response to this, demolition instead of refurbishment extension is not helping global warming or local dust pollution from demolition. CO2 absorbed by one mature tree in 1 year equals 32 bricks. The cases for demolition against refurbishment or extension of many of London's former council housing estates have been exaggerated, and we have seen a net loss of social rent housing in estate after estate all over London. Bearing in mind Merton Council declared a climate state of emergency recently, this flies in the face of decisions as framed like the Hyde Park estate demolition. Construction accounts for 45% of all CO2 emissions. 51% of all emissions from a home are emitted before anyone even moves in. A third of all UK waste is from the construction industry. All existing 3- and 4-storey apartment blocks on Hyde Park could have an additional residential floor added above with new roof insulation. A perfect example in our borough is the new extra storey added above Morden Court flats on West Barnes Lane in Rains Park. These buildings are of a similar age and construction to many of those on the Hyde Park estate. 2 courtyard quad spaces on the western end of the existing Hyde Park estate could have had smaller new residential blocks in the field. Total affordable homes proposed for the Hyde Park estate. My response to the application, so 608 homes plus 568 additional homes gives 1,176 homes. This is my understanding anyway. I stand corrected. The 357 extant permitted so-called affordable homes was under the latest SO 106 varying proposals have an additional applied uplift of 227 affordable houses, making so-called affordable housing a total of 584 or 49.6% of the total generation of Hyde Park estate, not even exactly half. If I count that as a percentage of the 2,272 homes quoted in section 1417 overall master plan, we deliver a 27.7% of affordable housing on the whole site. I find this quite objectionable, even if affordable was at 40%, as we've had some 9,000 people registered with Merton Council in need of housing. 568 so-called affordable homes on Merton's largest estate regeneration at Hyde Park goes nowhere near addressing the 9,000 homeless in the borough. The 40% of the affordable housing mix as shared ownership assumes, on my research just based on Croydon, a minimum someone of a household with a minimum income of £30,000 a year to be eligible for the mortgage rent mix for a 25% shared ownership flat. As a teaching assistant, I earn £17,000 a year. If I was a parent, this proposed intermediate housing would likewise do nothing to help as much as social rent, the proportion of social rent being lower. I also, since the news in May that Merton Council achieved the sale of company Chess 2013 Limited for 108.
Alexander, thank you so much for your contribution. Just had time. Really appreciate it. Can we now move on to Caroline? Caroline, you've got 3 minutes.
Hello, I'm the owner of 21 Merton High Street and speak on behalf of long-standing tenants. My property is the closest Victorian-built structure to the development. Many of the plans showed the proposed 7-storey block, now 8 stories, coloured brown on page 19 of the case officer's report. Built against the eastern flank wall of my 3-storey Victorian property, the gas meters and flue are situated on this wall. The proposed 8-storey block wraps around the southern rear garden, thereby encasing the gas flue and external gas meters. I requested a site inspection by the planning officer. His on-site inspection mentions our building situated 107 metres from the nearest part of the development. His conclusions were incorrect, but now in modifications they recognise this fact. The proposed 8 stories blocks fronts Merton High Street and dwarfs my building by 5 stories. The Victorian street is out of character. The 8-story block completely dominates the east and southern elevation of my property and will have significant effect on the residents whom they have right to light. The daylight, sunlight and overwhelming shadow document 22 concludes that 15 and 21 Merton High Street will have a significant overshadowing impact. So why has the design team ignored the fact and proposed an 8-story block that overlooks directly into the gardens and into the windows of the 3 residential units within 21 Merton High Street? Why is the planning being recommended and where there is an obvious loss of privacy, loss of light and overshadowing? We have on numerous occasions raised this point with the architects, Clarion and London Borough of Merton representatives and provided full contact details. To date, they have failed to engage to respond. The bulk, mass and height of this block fails LBM owned 2018 Estates Local Plan Policy EPH8 on building heights, Merton High Street. Buildings fronting Merton High Street must not result in unacceptable shadowing or blocking of sunlight. It fails in policy DMD2 2014 in that the development does not ensure provision of appropriate levels of sunlight and daylight to both adjoining buildings and gardens. It fails in Merton 21 draft plan policy D12.3, failing to provide appropriate levels of sunlight, daylight, quality of living conditions, amenity space and privacy on both proposed and adjoining buildings and gardens. Further to the modifications of the officer's report that have been received of late, my buildings is located next to plot 1, and I am only concerned with plot 1, as plot 7 and 8, as mentioned, has no significance in the matter in hand. Similar to all the daylight sunlight submissions are pointed to the whole development and not specifically to my property. Should this committee find in favour of this development and grant planning permission this evening, I will engage the Member of Parliament from Mitcham and Morden and request that this is called into the Secretary of State or a judicial review takes place. We have a right to light and privacy. We have none of these if the development is approved as planned.
Caroline, thank you so much for your very passionate plea on behalf of your property and raising the issues that you have done. So what I'd like to do now is ask ward councillors to speak for up to 2 minutes. So we have, in this order I've got here, Eddie Stringer, Mike Brunt, and then John Braithwaite. So we'll start with Eddie Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm speaking as a Wonder Ward councillor whose ward boundary is metres from the High Path estate. But I was also 4 years previously the Abbey councillor, which encompasses the site, and attended many consultations on this in that role. So I know from my regular conversations with residents on the High Path estate how desperately needed the regeneration is. And from my wider experience in the borough, how desperately we need new homes in Merton, particularly affordable and social homes. So this updated proposal does increase the density and the height of the estate, and there is no getting away from that. But it does deliver 568 additional units, 227 of which are affordable. The viability report suggests that this cannot be increased at this moment, but I would be keen to have a condition that keeps us under review as the detailed application comes in and as the economy changes. The heights are a concern for residents, particularly for those right next door, but on the whole, from the area's point of view, they seem to have been designed to have as low an impact as possible on the surrounding area and protect the view from the heritage buildings nearby. Beyond the homes, we need to consider the impact on the local economy, community and environment. And I welcome the re-provision of the community centre, but we need to make sure that that is in a way that works for current users, and Councillor Brunt will talk about this in more detail. And this should be considered before any final decision on this provision. On the environment, the report notes that the urban greening factor falls short of the London guidelines. And I specifically have a question about the Merton High Street trees. The report states that 0.2 hectares will be retained of mature plane trees, category B2. But in the applicant's own report, it notes that some of them are going to be removed and replaced by suitable trees. I would like us to monitor this closely and ensure that mature tree removal is limited, and ideally impose a condition that if they are removed, they're replaced with mature trees if possible. I've been impressed by the quality and design of the build of the homes delivered so far in phase 1. And the proposed designs here could create a great neighbourhood at the centre of Wimbledon if we take into account all of these additional impacts that we need to make sure have that benefit for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Mike now to follow.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking as Abbey Ward councillor, but I'd like it known, I'm not declaring the interest because it's a pecuniary interest, but I've been a member of St John's Church on the High Path estate since, well, for 67.5 years. And I'm also now a trustee of South Wimbledon Community Association, not for that long, I might add. So I welcome the provision of new homes in Merton, and I welcome the provision of the fact that it's right near South Wimbledon tube station. A lot of the estates, so therefore transport links and bus links are good. What I'd like to focus on, I've issued a number of questions that I subsequently would like answers to, but the ones I'd like to focus on now are the provision of community space. I know there's a lot of outdoor community space provided, but it seems there's a heavy emphasis on St John's Church Hall being the main source of community space. Given the increase in properties and people living on the estate, I don't consider that's enough provision. So I'd like to see more community space provision and more discussions with South Wimbledon Community Association and talks with St John's Church, of which I will not be part of because that wouldn't be appropriate. I think there's also a property there that's owned by the District Scout Association, the freehold of a small plot just behind the church hall, which when my dad was the scout leader there, he got the land swap, and that's in their possession. So there's scope for something much bigger in terms of community provision. I am aware of what other housing associations do, and particularly with Moat on the Pollard Hill estate and the provision of youth services and the funding of activities such as Rising Stars Football Club for young people. So I'd like to see more of that. I do echo the concerns of Caroline, who spoke behind me, about 21 on Merton High Street, because I've seen it, and the meters are right on the boundary as of flues.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that insight and also advocating on behalf of your residents building. I'd like to call John in now, and then afterwards we'll hear back from the applicant and agent. John.
Hello, I'm speaking as an Abbey Ward councillor as well as Mike. I'm also happy to see the development going ahead, be a great addition to the housing stock in the borough, and judging from comments of residents in the new blocks, such as how delighted they are to be in their new homes, this further development cannot come soon enough. As this is only the outline permission, I'd like to add that I hope that when the final plans are put before the committee, they will include an absolute minimum quantity of single aspect units. Development is going to take quite a few years yet to come to fruition. Meanwhile, the residents of the existing housing should not be forgotten. I see that new development also includes cycle storage, which is good. Is there any reason why this can't be provided also for the existing blocks? It's nice to see that the new units already built seem to have designed out a lot of the antisocial behaviour that residents in a number of existing blocks suffer daily, and I hope the new developments will also bear this in mind. I said at the start, I'm pleased to support this development. Can't come soon enough for a lot of the residents. I'd also like to echo the point about community space. I know the non-residential space has been reduced in the this draft of the plan. So I'm just wondering whether that is community or retail space, or what kind of non-residential space has been reduced. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that and clarifying and echoing Mike's point. I'd like to call in Brian from Claren Regen to speak, and he's got a team who may or may not chip in as well. Brian.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Brian Ham, and I'm Claren's Project Director for the Merton Regeneration Programme. I'll be relatively brief because you've had a very thorough officer's report, and I know you want to move on to addressing some of the questions that are being raised. I will try and address those towards the end of what I've got to say. We're investing about 1.8 billion in the regeneration of these three estates, High Path, Eastfields and Ravensbury. And since the consent was granted in 2019, we've delivered to date about 155, well, we have delivered 155 new homes. Every home built to date has been for an existing High Path or Ravensbury family, both social renters and homeowners. All are high quality, energy efficient homes. The next 54 homes at Ravensbury are well advanced, and we're preparing to make a start on site on the first phase at Eastfields and the next 113 homes at High Path. High Path is the largest of the three estates, as you'll be aware, and is crucial to the delivery of the whole regeneration programme. Without it, we couldn't afford to regenerate either Eastfields or Ravensbury. You know that the original High Path Master Plan proposed to deliver up to 1,704 new homes, as well as the commercial and community floor space and the new neighbourhood park. And you know that this was developed on the back of extensive engagement. Much has changed since that first master plan, not least the COVID-19 pandemic altering people's working and shopping habits. The highly efficient but nevertheless gas-fired energy systems proposed in the first master plan are also no longer acceptable as we collectively face up to the climate emergency and the need to decarbonise. And of course, the economics of building new homes, especially affordable homes, have worsened significantly in the face of changes to housing policy, construction inflation, and house price instability. So in response to these changes and challenges, we've worked with Merton's officers over the last year to respond and look at ways in which we can add further value to the regeneration of High Path. And this includes introducing fossil fuel-free energy systems and increasing the number of affordable homes. These proposals are an evolution of that 2019 master plan. They've been designed to retain many of the original master plan principles, including the access and movement strategy, the layout and street network, open space and public realm strategies, and the principles of high quality architecture and landscaping. The main revisions, as you've heard, involve an amended scale and massing strategy building on those established principles with a net uplift of up to 568 homes. This means that together with Eastfields and Ravensbury, the Merton Regeneration Programme will now deliver nearly 3,300 homes. The revisions allow us to rehouse existing residents earlier, and we still rehouse all the social and affordable renting households based on their housing need, addressing the overcrowding that 1 in 3 families currently face. And just to put a bit of tone to that, in phase 1, for example, there was a 6-person household living in a 1-bedroom flat. They're now living in a 3-bedroom duplex in phase 1. So just to give you an example of the chronic overcrowding that we're dealing with when we do provide the new homes. More affordable homes, with a further 40% of the additional being affordable, and the majority of these will be in the social rent tenure, not affordable rent, social rent, which is obviously in line with your policy aspirations. And as I mentioned earlier, energy efficiency measures, connection to a district heat network powered by air source heat pumps and photovoltaic panels will deliver fossil fuel-free energy. With these proposals, these proposals also bring an opportunity to build additional much-needed affordable homes for Merton, improve the financial viability of the broader programme, including Eastfields and Ravensbury, and allow us to rehouse existing households quicker. Just to address a couple of the points that were raised, Alexander talked about the number of homes and queried the base of some of the calculations. Of the 600 and odd homes which are currently on High Path or were on the original High Path, about 40% of those have been sold through right to buy. Now, when we replace a leaseholder or a freeholder who's exercised that right to buy, we can't count the replacement home as affordable because it's not. So we are replacing all of those. So the number for the true comparator is only 60% of the 600 and odd, because that's all that's left as affordable homes. So undoubtedly, we are increasing the number of affordable homes. And as I say, 60% of all the homes of the affordable tenure will be in social rent. The other point I think is about demolition versus new build. I mean, we look long and hard about this. Every single time we're looking at a regeneration project, the first question is, can it be refurbished? And we look at whether we can make existing homes fit for purpose for 30 years. We come up with a figure, X. We then look at what could be done to make it fit for the future, decarbonize it, make sure it's got the contemporary space standards that we need. Invariably, we then come up with a number which is twice times the make it fit for purpose for the next 30 years. To make it truly fit for the future, it's about twice the cost. We then look at whether we can demolish and rebuild. And that's where we start to find that we can hit the sweet spot of viability between providing the affordable homes that you want and the new high quality energy efficient homes as well. So we don't blindly knock down old buildings that can be rescued. The ones that we knock down are those that really are incredibly expensive or even beyond redemption. Ray.
Brian, thanks very much. I wanted to just let you finish that point before moving on, but thank you. That's really, really helpful. You've addressed those 2 points. I'd like to call in Cabinet Member Stephen Allen Brittus, who's a Cabinet Member for Transport, who'd like to speak on this matter. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Delivery of the High Park Estate regeneration is critical to not only improving housing conditions across the whole programme, including Eastfields and where I'm a ward councillor, Ravensbury, but also for providing a pipeline of new housing over the next 10 years. Chair, it was 10 years ago in 2013, when I was leader of this council, that I kicked off discussions with Clarion about this major regeneration. Now, with regard to transportation active travel, the approved master plan provides a network of well-designed streets which will encourage great permeability for walking and cycling through the neighbourhood. The new park is also welcome not only for residents of the estate, but as a new amenity for the whole of South Wimbledon to enjoy. The park in later phases of the scheme provides more pleasant walking routes between South Wimbledon Tube Station towards the outstanding school at Harris Academy and Merton Abbey Mills. Although the design of individual blocks will be for reserved matters, I support the range of cycle parking being made available to residents and encourage Clarion to increase the number of EV charging points. Transport contributions will also be requested towards healthy street improvements in and around the estate, including improvements to the cycle lane facilities on Hyde Park. Finally, Chair, most recent tube station to go step-free is Moorgate 2022. Next is Knightsbridge 2023. We want step-free access for South Wimbledon Tube Station. These plans provide funding for a feasibility study for a second entrance to South Wimbledon Station and leading to step-free access, which this administration will explore with TfL. Chair, thank you very much.
Stephen, thank you very much for that very helpful, very timely comments as well about South Wimbledon. So I'd like to call in Awat to reflect on all we've heard and just a recap of some of the points that may want to tease out in that Awat. So it was really, really helpful to hear Alexander's points. I think Brian's addressed some of them, but I heard particularly his personal plea about being a teaching assistant and the affordable rent rates. That'd be great to reflect on some of that. Caroline made points but about obviously the design code, but I think in particular it'd be great to get to the bottom of this gas access issue for her. That would be really great. Councillor Stringer, very important to understand the point of the tree replacement as well, and obviously Councillor Brunton Braithwaite obviously talked a lot about the community centre. Be good to hear about that, and also I think the point about I think there's 2,700 square metres revised commercial space. How does that impact on that community space as well? Be good to just understand that. And I think that's enough for now. So thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Chair. To start with the first response, thank you, Alexander. Just to remind members again, this is an outline plan application, so we're seeing this in the very early stages. The reserve matters for phase 4 again in the timeline will be submitted in 2026-2027 commencement. So members will see this again when it comes into detail. What is presented at the moment is a revised outline plan application for phases 4 to 7, which comprise of the additional 568 homes and the 40% affordable housing that is being provided. I'd like to pass my colleague on, who can share some comments.
Thank you. On the issue of sustainability and demolition, in 2018, the council adopted an estates local plan, having worked with Clarion for about 5 years previously and consulted with residents on the 3 estates. This was because when Clarion reviewed all of their homes across Merton, with a view to making sure that they were up to good sustainability standards and fit for the future. There were some places that could not reasonably be brought up to those standards. And it also helps to address issues such as overcrowding and other matters that simply couldn't be achieved from repairing those homes. This, the estates local plan is referenced in the committee report, and this, as the committee report says, the proposal is in line with it.
Thank you, Tara. To go on to, thank you, Mr. Charles, to talk about Ms. Carpenter, sorry, thank you. Looking at the points made about the 21 Merton High Street, officers acknowledge and confirm the objection that has been received and have responded in the updated mod sheet. The site plot 1 does adjoin the neighboring property. What officers did in the methodology is to assess the impact on the neighboring adjoining properties, which is north of the proposed site and south of Merton High Street. But also, as planning officers, we have to assess the scheme in line with policy and looking at where the tallest part of the development is. So again, there might have been a misuse in words, but the assessment is clear. And what's really important to point out here is that the development on plot 1 adjoining to number 21 Merton High Street is extending in height by 2.5 meters. What the design code shows is that there are setbacks that would be involved within the final sort of reserve matters detailed application. So effectively, the outline plan application that's already been approved has already approved the height. The 2.5 height increase and taking into consideration the assessment on daylight, sunlight, overshadowing, scale and massing that's been undertaken, the 2.5 height increase is considered to not have a significant impact on the adjoining property of number 21 Merton High Street, as the mod sheet identifies. Now, in terms of the gas meter, and that's recognized obviously from the site photos, officers had undertaken site visits over the last 6 months since the submission of the outline plan application. Officers satisfied that obviously the flank wall would adjoin the proposed development. However, officers would also note that the proposed outline plan application, this is an outline plan application, that we are going to see reserve matters, and a lot of this with regarding flank wall and gas meters relates to party wall matters. So essentially, when a reserve matters application does come in, at the point of prior to commencement, it is duty bound and legally bound that the applicant and the adjoining property enter into what's called a party wall matter. This isn't a planning matter, but it is something that we recognize and it's important, but it's not a planning matter. So those issues will be resolved at the point of reserve matters. Thank you.
Fantastic. No, thank you, Awa. Can I just revisit some of the points made by before we open the floor to colleagues? Can you have any reflections on the affordable cost? I mean, I appreciate we may need to bring Clarion in to answer some of the questions. So the point Alexander made on the sort of social rent costs, and I think it'll be really great to hear further your views on the urban greening factors and the new and the old for old trees. Mike's definitely point about that community centre. And it'd be really great to understand, has any discussions been had with the applicant regarding step-free access at South Wimbledon and securing that via a legal agreement, that sort of assessment? And if we need to pull again the applicant in, let's do that as well.
I think I'd like to start with community centre because that's obviously everything's important here. Just to note, there is an existing community centre as we know it on the end of Pincourt Road and High Park. And the idea is that this will be replaced at phase 2B, yes. And what will happen is that it will be actually reprovided in a larger form. So it will be extended and reprovided to meet all modern cons and facilities. But the objective is to ensure that there will be a reprovision. And whilst there is a loss of that space, a temporary provision would be provided. So whatever is lost would be reprovided in terms of permanent until the permanent is open. So effectively, you've got a community space that is already going to be re-provided, but also furthermore, up to 750 square meters of community floor space is proposed to accommodate and replacement of the hall for the St. John of the Divine Church. And the proposals therefore accord with London Plan Policy S1 and the Core Planning Strategy Policy CS13. And the potential to provide opportunities for the provision of additional community floor space as part of the mixed uses. So we acknowledge that there will be, as part of the proposal, 2 community centres that would be provided.
Cool. Do you want to, should we bring clarity, or do you want to work on the other points as well? What's best?
Perhaps maybe bring clarity at this point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it'd be great, Brian, to hear just any further clarification or reassurance you can provide my colleague.
We're in active discussions with the St. John's Church. We've been talking to them for quite a long time, and we're waiting for them to come back to us with their thoughts on the proposals that we've put to them. We're trying to find a temporary solution for them, possibly in phase 3, and we've put some drawings to them, as well as then finding a longer term solution for them in what we call phase 6 or phase 7, and we've given them some choices. So we're in a mature dialogue with them, and we will do all that we can to accommodate what they're looking for. As a bare minimum, it will be a replacement for what they've got, but there's no reason why we can't work with them to get more than that. And of course, there's also a community space going into phase 2, which will be starting construction on fairly soon as well. So there will be community space at both ends, the east and the west of the development. Trees. We actually planted some trees about 5 years ago to be transplanted onto this site, so they would be more mature by the time that they were transplanted. So they've been living in Morden Rec on Farm Road for the last 5 years, and when it's ready, they'll move across onto the estate. I think that's all I can pick up in addition to what's already been said from the officers. Thank you.
Brilliant. I think the only thing outstanding was maybe South Wimbledon, understanding any feasibility assessment, because I understand there's been some conversation with TfL. And I think there was also, so community and trees, we've all done that. Yes, so that was the outstanding item.
TfL have asked for a contribution to the feasibility study, and we're just trying to be clear with them as to what we get for the £100,000 it's going to cost, just to make sure we get something that doesn't say you need more studies. So we want to nail it once and for all. But yes, there's already as you know, a fire exit that goes out at the back of the station. So we're in dialogue with TfL about getting that study done, but making sure it's done properly so we get an answer.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Hey, anything else to add?
Yes, Chair. I'd just like to talk about the urban green factor and what the methodology that policies planning officers undertook in calculating the urban green factor. The urban green factor is the London Plan guidance on urban green factor is set, and which is supported by London Plan Policy G5. Applicants are required to do, it's all based on the proposed. Applicants are required to look at the base minimum, what is being proposed. They take a calculation of all the hedgerows, the trees, any bit of green space that's there at that moment. And then within the London Plan guidance, there is a set of scores that's applied for each single species within the code. So for instance, how it would be, you get the site area, you calculate site area, and then each single species is then calculated. That then the contribution then required is divided by the site area, and then you get the actual urban green factor, which means in this case it's 0.3, which is short of the required, which is 0.40. One thing to remember here is that the urban green factor is a target. It's a target that is set. It's not essentially has to be met. On balance, one needs to consider the neighborhood park that's been created, the open space and the public realm, and the enjoyment of open space that's been included within the actual development. So based on the shortfall and on balance, officers considered that this would be an acceptable compromise.
No, thank you for explaining how that calculation is done, and no doubt we may get one or two questions more on this. Super. So opening up to the floor, colleagues, 2 questions at a time. Matt, super speedy, and then Dan, go.
Thank you. We were blessed to have the Cabinet Member for Transport for the second time in a row at committee, which is great. And we were just we heard from him that he said the application provides funding for a viability study into step-free access at South Wimbledon. The mod sheet says at 5.1.5 that the application has responded to TfL comments but doesn't say what they are. And at 5.1.12 is vague about the financial contribution. We just heard in the room it's 100 grand potentially. So because we're at that position where we haven't yet got that agreement, I'm wondering whether it's either planned to be in a section 106 or whether there is an informative perhaps that we could place, which would say if it's not viable, that we can use that 100 grand for something else, say for instance, a back entrance to the station with a new gate line that speaks to phase 3.
Good question, Dan, and then we'll go to answers.
I had 2 sets of questions, if that's okay, on 2 topics. The first one on EV charging, and I wonder if the applicant can expand upon this. So I note that 20% are going to be EV charging. By the time this development has finished, it will be illegal to buy a petrol car. So why are you only going for the bare minimum when by the end of this development, you'll only be able to buy electrical or hybrid cars? Of the 20%, how many of them are rapid charging? I note that in paragraph 23.16, you state that you should demand require it, you will convert future spaces, you will have the ability to convert spaces into EV charging. How will you measure whether demand requires it? What will you do to check? The easy solution, just make them all EV charging. So that's EV charging, that's the first set. The second set of questions is, I've got some experience with Clarion when it comes to repairs and supporting residents, and I can't find anywhere here in this document, and forgive me if I've overlooked it, a space for wardens or for residents to go and report repairs. Is such a space going to be located in here? If it will be, how often will it be staffed? Will it be staffed only during hours when people are in the office, or will it also be staffed when people are back at home and not out in the office? Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, as well, for those questions. Good to reflect on. Do you want to come in on any of those first before I probably suspect we need Brian and colleagues to reflect as well?
Yeah, I'd just like to say one thing, the conversations that's happening at the moment with TfL and the applicant, members should note that within the section 106 heads of terms, there is a section in there that the applicants are engaging with TfL, and officers will apply the necessary tests in terms of whether it's necessary, relevant to development and so on. And at that point, we can determine whether the actual contribution is required, but it is guaranteed that that contribution, if it is required, would be spent wholly on the development.
Thank you. Do you want to pick any of the EV points or the site office up at all?
Yes, Chair, thank you. I think that's a very, very good point that's been made about the EV charging points and the way the market is heading. And that's actually a very, really good point. The London plan sets those guidances, but we do know in the lifetime of development, 15 years, things will change. We know that. One thing to remember is that adding the infrastructure at this stage could mean that in, say, 5-6 years' time, when technology does change, you're set back. And that has a huge impact on viability. Nevertheless, I think it is a very important point that perhaps maybe there could be an informative or a condition that would become a sort of a monitoring of the needs. Clarion already, as I understand it, do undertake a monitoring assessment. That could be something that would be provided within the reserve matters, sort of to gauge whether there's a substantial need.
Super, thank you. It'd be great to hear from Brian on, hold your horses. No, we'll have another round in a second. Great to hear from Brian on EV and site office as well, and that'd be great.
I'll deal with the office one first, because it's the one I know slightly less about, but there will be an office on the site. I can't, though, tell you what the opening hours will be, but I'll endeavour to come back and inform you about that. The point about the EV charging is we use the phrase 20% active and 80% passive. So the power is put into the infrastructure so that as the demand rises, you take the power out of the ground into the machine that sits on the ground that you plug your car into. The reason we don't put everything in at the outset is because machines get vandalized, they need maintaining, and the technology is evolving. So the particular way the technology is evolving, we expect that, for example, through your smartphone, you will be able to tell the system how much power you need, and it will then charge your car at cheap overnight rates, for example. Now, that's not easily available on the street now, but it's only a year or two away. So this technology is evolving very, very quickly. It does cost to maintain these. I mean, I've been using electric vehicles for 8 years now, and I can tell you that the initial flush of installation was great, but they fell out of repair, into disrepair fairly quickly. You've got to keep on top of the maintenance of them. So that maintenance costs, and if you're charging that back to the people who are using electric vehicles, it makes them very expensive to use. So it acts as a disincentive. So monitoring comes automatically. The machines will tell us, the operator will tell us the peak demand that we have at any point in time. So we can easily monitor that every year. We can share that with you, and we can plan to always put in, say, at least a year of forecast demand before that demand is there. So we're always slightly ahead of the game, but we're never having to carry the cost, the obsolescence, the vandalism of 100% up front.
Can I use Chair's prerogative and just come on the back of that? That's an interesting suggestion that seem we're probably going to head to a condition at some point on this, but how would that practically, do you see the resident owning the bay paying for that, paying for the new installation, or do you see that as part of the sort of the pool of funds for maintenance?
It's a communal system, so you will have a card and you'll get charged for the electricity. The installation costs will be carried by the cost of the development. So you will pay for through an operator. You'll pay like you do when you go to park in Tesco and recharge your car in Tesco or whatever it is.
No. So I don't mean the use of it. I mean, so say for example, you have 20%, and as we know, the increase is in EV cars is there. I'm a resident. I have just bought a property. There is a parking space apart from it, or I want to use a parking space, but it doesn't have an EV charger. How do I go about getting that charger? And will I get paid? Do I need to pay for that charger, or is that going to be part of your business as usual cost for the build?
It will be part of the business as usual cost to build. I'm not aware that there's going to be very many charging points that will be within the curtilage of the house. Most of it's going to be in common areas. So that will go in as part of the infrastructure.
Super. And I'm sorry, colleagues, I'm being a pain, but I noticed obviously you've got a really positive increase in disabled parking spaces. The way the technology is going with those mobility vehicles, I wonder how have you reflected the demand for EV in those spaces as well?
Well, in due course, 100% of those disabled bays, will be EV powered. As the demand rises and we'll monitor the usage, then as I say, we'll put it in advance.
Super. More to continue probably. All right, Mike, and then Billy on his debut.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I just draw attention to the fact that I am using my tablet to write notes and not making a prepared speech, as some people have previously accused me of. Secondly, I sort of understanding the nature of the project and the issues of light and privacy, but also trying to balance it with achieving housing in the borough. It is difficult to sometimes not build up where you might necessarily not want to. But I am having a real issue with access to the gas meter and the gas in general with the distance from 21 Merton High Street. And that is a real concern to me. So can I have a reassurance there'll be a proper assessment done? Because at the moment, that is a particular issue. Anything involving gas works, incredible health and safety issue and needs to be handled extremely delicately. So I'm going to need some reassurance on that issue. And secondly, can I just back up both Councillor Johnston and your points? In my personal experience with EV charging, is actually disabled residents who largely own the vehicles that require them. So I think we're going to need those EV charging points sooner than later. So I would like some commitment on that being built as part of the first wave of EV charging being built, because that allocation is desperately needed.
Thank you. And then Billy.
Thanks, Chair. The bit I'm struggling with, I'm not very clear on where we are with Transport for London on access at South Wimbledon Station. I wasn't clear where we're going with that, because it seems to me, I mean, we're just about to get Hurrah Tooting Railway Station having lifts, which is terrific. But I'm not clear with South Wimbledon Station, and it seems to lend itself, given the demographic that I can see walking past it and that. It seems to be an area where it would really benefit if we had. So what is the position? I wasn't clear what the position was with Transport for London and Clarion, right?
Super. So I think, so just to summarize, I think, obviously, Mike's point about a commitment in terms of the issue that we've heard earlier on and how that can be resolved, and of course echoing EV. But I think what may be helpful then, if I just extend your question, Billy, is what are the practical challenges for it in terms of design? Because how would this work in practice? You know, there's no point in us saying let's do something if you can't do it. And obviously the community benefit would be quite helpful as well. Hey, well, I don't know if you want to jump in any of those.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll jump in just before the applicant. I think it's worth again pointing out, and just to reassure you, that the reserve matters application, which will be a detailed form, will be brought back to members at the time when reserve matters will be submitted, and that actually would relate to all matters into access, layout, scale, appearance, and landscaping, and that would be brought before members to review and assess. And at this point, in terms of access to the gas meters, and that is a very good point, again pointing out the fact that it is an important matter and it is a party wall act, but prior to commencement, Clarion will be required to undertake under the necessary party wall act to ensure that those gas meters are appropriately relocated in a safe manner as possible. In regards to the EV charging points, I think I'd like to throw that question to Clarion as to when they, at the earliest point of when they would seek to put those forward. But I know that electric vehicle charging points are there at the moment, and there is going to be a 20% increase, plus all remaining to be passive. Again, looking at the conditions of whether there could be a monitoring condition to ensure that if Clarion can, then they could potentially provide that. Yes, just to reassure you, I think for me is that reserve matters will be coming, and they are going to be a timely manner with 2027. So for phase 4, you'll see that. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. Hey, it'd be great to, before I go to Susie, just reflect on the practicalities there.
I'm still not clear.
No, so I'm bringing in Brian now on your point.
All right.
Yeah. So Brian, if you can reflect on Billy's point, because AWAT won't know the ins and outs of the conversations you're having, and it'd be great just to reflect on the practical applications of the challenges there.
I happen to have an expert sat 3 seats next to me, so I'll bring him in. But just to say that the money is for a feasibility study that we're just negotiating with TfL at the moment.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Stephen Evans from Frishman. We're the Transport and Highways consultants who've been advising Clarion throughout the planning application process, and indeed prior to that. As the transport consultants on the application, we've been discussing directly with TfL Spatial Planning, most recently in connection with their response to the planning application regarding the feasibility study for step-free access at South Wimbledon Station. As Brian points out, that is a request for a financial contribution towards the feasibility study. We understand the feasibility study may in fact cost in excess of the contribution that they're requesting from Clarion. And at this stage, discussions are ongoing, but we're seeking clarification as to what's the likelihood of matters progressing should that feasibility study be carried out and completed, because it's obviously a significant amount of money that TfL are asking for. This is an affordable housing scheme with lots of demands and pressures and needs to deliver other things. And if indeed there is a contribution payable, we want to make sure that that actually leads to something tangible being delivered. At this stage, we understand that no detailed work has been carried out in terms of how you would physically deliver step-free access. So we just want to understand what would actually happen, rather than this just being a feasibility study that then doesn't progress beyond that, and that it's effectively money well spent. So as I say, that's a discussion that's ongoing at the moment.
Super. Can I just go on the back of that very briefly? I mean, how are you advising Clarion on design aspects to not prevent potential step free and any sort of implications that you've seen in reviewing what could happen?
So at this stage, we've seen no detail from TfL in terms of how they would potentially implement step-free access. The discussion has simply been a request from TfL for a financial contribution for them to then carry out a feasibility study. But at this stage, we haven't seen any detail, and we understand that detail does not yet exist. It is simply an aspiration to deliver step-free access, but the details still needs to be worked through on TfL's side.
I think kind of my point was it's doable. It sounds like it's doable, but I was basically understanding your experience of how you would do it on the site rather than the actual concrete discussions you've had. It's more for confidence that we're not unwittingly agreeing to something that actually undoes something very good that can come in the future.
Yeah, at this stage, we simply don't know whether it is doable, which is why we have requested clarification from TfL, provide some certainty for the applicant as well, that if this contribution was agreed to, the feasibility study was carried out, that this could actually lead to something. But as I say, at this stage, we don't know how feasible or not step-free access is. We understand it hasn't been looked at in significant detail
Okay.
now.
No, thank you. Susie and anyone else? And then Michael again.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3, but they're very short. The first one is, can we condition, based on what's already been discussed, the electric vehicle charging for disabled vehicle drivers being done sooner rather than later? Can we actually guarantee that'll happen? Because it does seem very, very important. Thank you, Dan. And similarly, can we condition the applicant monitoring the need for electric vehicle charging points at every stage to guarantee that it is done as it should be? Then 2 other ones I don't want to lose. There's a reference, and I don't have the page, to a need for mitigation of dust and pollution at the ground and first floor levels on those flats facing Merton High Street and Morden Road. I may have missed it, but I haven't seen it, and if it's not in there, I'd like it to be. And the third one, and please don't all laugh, this is an absolutely golden opportunity for swift boxes. They are an endangered species. And what I would like to do is to strengthen the conditions on page 87, and the conditions given for the bat box details would apply in almost identical terms to swift bricks. So prior to the commencement of above ground works within a plot, details of the proposed number, location and specification of swift bricks, then they could be conditioned, and there are recommendations as to the optimal ones, and I would be grateful if that could be included.
Sure, no worries. So we're jumping ahead a little bit in terms of comments, but let's take your point, and we've already got some conditions raised by colleagues, Dan, but I think also there's been a nuanced condition about EV given the change of the spectrum and the length of the timing, but it's good to hear there's support already for that. Mike, and then I'll bring another hand in, Dan, because of the space for questions.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to Councillor Stringer's point about trees, can we get the condition in that the trees will be at least semi-mature by the time they are replaced, just to make sure? Because if you're replacing mature trees with saplings, that isn't going to do particularly much. Second point on the sort of use of community space. I know they said they would replace the community space lost with community space of either the same size or bigger. But can we talk about what sort of community space is going to be added, how it's going to help residents in the local area? I know that on big estates like this, particularly with a lot of primary schools nearby, and you can get some antisocial behaviour. So can we make sure that they're working with local schools and Merton Future Change residents to make sure that we get this properly conditioned?
Cool. I think that the second sounds more of a question. We're still in question. So let's bring Brian and colleagues in on that as well. Dan, is this a question or a comment? Yeah, cool.
I just wanted to pick up. I don't think when I appreciate a number of questions and thanks for your explanations. How many of the EV chargings are rapid charging? If the answer is 0, why is it 0? And I note, so in your response about monitoring EV usage, I understand that you'll basically see how much of the capacity, the 20%, is currently being utilized, and from there you'll be able to deduce how quickly you need to expand EV charging points. And that was the same response for disabled EV charging. But if there's zero EV charging for disabled spaces, how can you monitor usage of it and see if the demand is growing, if you see what I mean?
So hold on there. So we've got two questions. So I think Mike's point was about it may be a bit future thinking, but how is the community space going to be used for community cohesion and reducing antisocial behaviour? And then obviously Dan's continued point relating to your scaling and use of that. And if I add an addendum to that, I think the ultimate concern is it would discourage someone from buying in because they won't have access already there. So that'd be great to understand that. And yeah, we'll go direct to you, Brian.
Swift boxes, yeah, no brainer. Happy to incorporate those. I'm not an expert on them by any stretch of the imagination, but we've no difficulty with that at all. On the EV charging and disabled bays, I mean, we'll put EV charging into the disabled bays from the outset, as we will for the existing residents from the outset. So roughly speaking, it'll be 20% of the provision of both that will be EV from the outset. Now, if we know, because there is evidence of there being more demand from disabled people, then of course we'll put them in. It's again, it's just very straightforward. We have no incentive not to put them in other than not wanting obsolescence, not wanting vandalism, and not wanting high maintenance or high charging costs for residents, because the maintenance is being spread over too many machines relative to their use. So we'll put it in from the outset, and we're happy to work with officers about whatever the wording of that condition is. Annual monitoring and making sure we've always got at least a year's supply ahead of where the demand is, not just responding after the event to the demand. So we can monitor that through peak usage. So we'll be looking for constant underutilization at peak times effectively, and always stay ahead of the game. We've no interest in doing otherwise. Rapid chargers, there will be, I can't tell you the exact percentage at this point in time, but again, we can talk to your officers about getting a condition on that. I mean, most, you know, these charging points are not going to be used for people who are passing through the estate like they would be in a retail park or a motorway service station. These are people who are largely going to be charging overnight and looking for cheap rates rather than rapid charging. But obviously we'll look at the evidence of what's needed and take it from there. My colleague wants to go with a supplementary answer as well.
Sorry, yeah, just to add to that. So in terms of identifying demand and making sure there's enough provision so that you don't reach a situation where all of the capacity is being used and you don't know what the latent demand is. I mean, for example, there was a TfL report from December 2021, which identified that 1 in 8, so that's around 12.5%, of new cars registered in London in 2020 were electric vehicles, compared with the 20% active electric vehicle charging requirements. So if we take 12.5% as the, I think we can probably take that as quite a high estimate, because obviously you've got a lot of existing older vehicles which aren't electric. Providing 20% up front is still providing quite a bit of headroom over and above what the demand on day one might be. The other thing, just to add in terms of monitoring, is there is a requirement to do travel plan monitoring. That would be an annual requirement. Travel plan monitoring includes things such as household questionnaires. You can ask households, residents directly what their preferred methods of travel are, what their attitudes and thoughts are on things like electric vehicles. So you can get that intelligence, you can get that information, even if they don't have an electric car today. You can find out, for example, you know, I'm a resident that I'm thinking of purchasing an electric vehicle, and that can help influence what might then be provided over the course of the next 12 months.
Thank you. One final round of questions. I've got a few questions as well. Michael, and then I'll ask mine.
Just some reassurances, if possible. Given the difficulties that Clarion have experienced with the Ravensbury build, what reassurances can you give us, given the financial difficulties, the dealings with building companies there, that we won't experience the same thing on the High Path estate? Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, go for it.
We can't give you any cast iron guarantees because that's the commercial construction industry, unfortunately. All I can say is that on Ravensbury, we're working really, really hard to get the project back on track. And we are optimistic at this point in time that we'll be faced with a delay that we'll be measuring in round about 4 months, something like that, before practical completion. So we're doing our level best. We're working around the clock to get new contractors on board so that residents don't face an interminable delay. But we can't guarantee that, you know, whoever we go to, and we've seen some huge construction companies, you know, even of the scale of Carillion, go bust in recent years. There's no way around that. All we can do is make sure that we are on top of, and we can't actually take any action if we suspect that somebody's in financial difficulty until they've gone pop once they're appointed. So it is a difficult one, but all I can say is that we're working very, very hard to get Ravensbury back on track.
Super. Okay, I've just got hopefully a few quick fire ones, and Eamon and Brian jump in as you need. I mean, from the report there was a reference to 30% overcrowding currently. It'd be great to understand. Does that relate to the existing residents that were already rehoused, or is that what's the current context of that? And then just I've got a few more, but second question just because of time. There was a reference in the mod sheet that that car parking spaces have been re-provided for existing tenants and residents. Can I just understand that has actually happened and just get that sort of formally for YouTube preservation, that they're all happy and everything's there basically?
30% of residents are overcrowded in their old properties, their current properties. None will be overcrowded in their new properties. That's not to say that they can't become overcrowded over time as they have more, as their families grow, but certainly at the point in which they go into the new properties, no one will be in an overcrowded situation. Sorry, what was the second?
The second one's just about there's reference that the car parking provision is
all residents who have existing spaces and permits will be accommodated in the new layout, and we've done the assessment of that. We've done the calculation of that. That's why we're in excess of the GLA target. I mean, you know, this is in such a high accessibility area. GLA are pushing us to have virtually zero car parking apart from disabled bays, but we're negotiating a position where we've got a capacity to allow existing residents to not have to sell their cars, because that would be very difficult for them.
Thank you. Sorry, just a few more briefly. So I've noticed, I mean, again, in the mod sheet, we reference the design code because how this, from a program perspective, you may want to reflect on this, you know, very strategically, you're running through the design code and updating that accordingly, and that reflects on the wider build. It'd be great to hear from you and maybe some of the panel there, how that design code will evolve over the time, particularly because obviously the London standards have just been published as well. And basically the concern I have as a chair is that as much as, you know, this is fantastic, the design code does have a lot of weight and power. And if that's updated, not necessarily with our site, it may be inadvertently not knowing what is coming next. So it's just understanding that and sort of the direction of travel.
We have the scheme architect with us, so I'll pass.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. The design code is a key framework element of developing the master plan. And as such, it will be an iterative document which will be changed over the period of time that it is in force on the different RMAs. For example, we know now that the London Housing Design Standards has just come out. This is something that we need to take on board within the design code and see how that can be implemented throughout the life of the developments and what that would mean. this will be something that will be transferred into the document itself and find out whether we need to make things mandatory or whether it needs to be advisory and so on, as the structure of the document currently is. So we will be looking at the document and we will be taking things like that on board so that it is each RMA is compliant and the design code is enforcing and reinforcing those elements of it.
That's fantastic. No, thank you. And I think, oh, sorry, Awad, go for it.
Just want to make a point. Councillor Hicks asked a question about the mitigation for dust emissions. That's a very, very good point, because residents will have to live with a lot. But one of the most important things as planning officers is that we have captured a condition that gives local authority a great degree of control, and that's captured in condition 19, demolition and construction method statements. I've seen through the development of phase 1 that the development has been undertaken in accordance with the conditions that was imposed with the original outline, so with the original application. So in terms of whether there's going to be safeguarding, it's not just the dust and emissions of air quality, but it's also to do with noise impacts and to do with any vibrations that may result. So one can say that being involved in the project, seeing phase 1 done in a sort of really appropriate manner in accordance with the conditions set for the revised outline plan applications, we believe we're comfortable with that. Yeah, go.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, and that's marvellous. But what I was also concerned about is that the ground and first floor flats onto the main roads, somewhere in here, there is a suggestion that there will be a need for mechanical mitigation of dust and possibly noise in those flats permanently, not just during the construction process. And you mentioned the possibility of conditioning it, but I just haven't picked it up. I don't think it's been done yet, and I'd be grateful if it could be, if there is an identified need, which there seems to be.
I think, Awad, correct if I'm wrong, that was because it was a reserved matter point, but yeah, yeah.
Correct. That kind of stuff will be picked up in reserved matters, and that's a very important point. But that will be something that will be picked up in reserved matters. Yes.
Can I just suggest then, to get Awad and John's advice on this, we stick that as an informative, because it may be us, it may be a future committee, but the only way to record it for posterity is to stick it on as an informative, which carries, it's not conditional weight, but it carries weight in sense of, we can look, that's there for the formal record if there's a concern.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
That's fine, Chair. Yep, we can include that on the decision notice.
Fine. And final question from me before we go to comments. So I think, really impressed about what's happened so far in terms of waste management for the site. You know that for our estates and the borough, waste management is a challenge. It'd be great to understand more about food recycling, and is that part of the waste mix and how that is being managed as well. Yeah, great just to hear a bit more. Appreciate this is outline, and appreciate that it's just understanding the aspiration, given, as we mentioned before, you pivot this with design code, and the design code may evolve more than the current build, if that makes sense.
Thank you. It's an underground refuse system, so large containers are subterranean, and you drop the rubbish in through the top, and there will be dedicated food waste units. This will, of course, rely on people separating their waste into the appropriate streams, but it's a very innovative system and can be quite expensive for us to run. But you will have most of the storage in metal containers under the ground to minimize the risk of vermin and the like around the estate. But there will be separate waste food recycling stations.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to move on to comments and sort of extending further on to condition suggestions as well. So I think Martin's hand shot up, and then Matt.
Thank you, Chair. This application is, in my view, an excellent application in terms of providing much needed additional housing in this area, and also as well addressing many of the issues that do exist in terms of the High Path estate, especially in terms of overcrowding and the overall uplift It's my view that it's more appropriate for new development to take place rather than demolition and the existing estate demolished rather than being refurbished and repaired. That obviously options were looked at in the dim and distant past, but it is unviable. Sometimes I think when people put forward these items, it's another excuse just to be a NIMBY and to stop development taking place. I know myself from going to the High Path estate, many people do welcome the regeneration as well. They want it to happen. We know we would like to have been further ahead by this stage, but it's obviously trying to get the scheme, given that this is a comprehensive regeneration which will take place over a number of years. And there are still obviously a number of issues when we do come to detailed applications. We've obviously been through 2 detail stages already, and obviously more will be coming before the planning committee here tonight. I think obviously in terms of the points that Caroline Muller-Carpenter, I do think they should be obviously clarified in terms of the access issues. But my view as well is that this is something that I think is pioneering in terms of development. We have got huge housing need in this borough, but we also as well know that this will provide much needed additional affordable housing, but also importantly, social housing provision, given that we have nearly 10,000 people on our waiting list here in Merton and people living in accommodation, which is not currently suitable. So I will be supporting this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Matt.
Thank you everyone for bearing with us. Basically, I wanted to say to Alexander that South Wimbledon Town Centre is in the emerging local plan in regards to both building heights and as a designated town centre. So building on top of existing buildings doesn't quite meet that objective, even though I understand his concerns on climate. And then with Caroline as well, hopefully officers have reassured you that you'll get your day in court in a few years with the party agreement arrangements. Yes, there will be buildings up to 6 to 8 stories on Merton High Street, but I note that the outline of the application site doesn't go right up to the back of number 21. So the building actually is perpendicular to your side wall. And so therefore, overshadowing hopefully should be able to be looked at in reserve matters. And once we see the height of the building right up against that, it is a positive, I think, as well for buildings like yours, because at the moment the commercial comes to an end right where you are. I went and had a look yesterday, and I think it's going to be great to see a continuation of the high street with commercial at ground floor and a replication of the grid system that's across the road in the Battles, which will really make the estate make sense. So positives of the application for me are the underground refuse system, the fact we can accommodate existing residents earlier, even the fact that the taller buildings will abut the park, and the park is such a great thing for South Wimbledon and sorely needed. So I will be voting to approve this outline permission.
Brilliant. So Michael and Susie.
Thank you, Chair. In general, I support the principle of the redevelopment and I would sorely like to see it go ahead. But I do worry because of a lack of trust over previous Clarion applications dealing with Clarion developments that Merton are going to need to be involved and monitoring at every stage with an extremely keen eye to make sure that this is done to a reasonable and hopefully good standard. But so I will be voting to approve the application, but I would like to make sure that we get a keen eye and make sure that this is really taken over by Merton, because there's just a lack of trust there.
Thank you for sharing your concerns, Susie, and then Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Like everybody else, I am very, very pleased to see this scheme being built. And I have been reassured tonight about the need for it to be done as opposed to a refurbishment, about what's been said about the community centre and what's been said about EV charging. And I am very, very pleased to see the level of social affordable housing and acknowledge the desperate need for these to be built. So I will, despite my great sympathy with the arguments about the party wall, And the fact that these are yet more tall buildings, I am definitely going to be voting for it.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, I also will be voting for this application because credit where credit is due. I love the ambition, I love the investment, and I love the commitment to house desperately needed, or to build desperately needed affordable houses. I love how that has been picked up, and it's also providing much needed homes for sites that are also in desperately need of regeneration, Eastfields and in Ravensbury. Talking about conditions, is it an appropriate place at this stage to condition staffing of the office so that the office would be staffed when residents are actually at home and not at work? So perhaps we could do something like vague, like 6 days a week, because then that would capture at least one day. I'm not sure, is that possible at this stage? I also love the reassurances from Clarion about the monitoring, but forgive me if I don't just believe the words. Can we also have conditions about the EV monitoring so that it's written into something? And also the disabled parking EV, whether that can be carved out separately to encourage, I don't know, perhaps a faster or speedier monitoring of that in terms of EV and need. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further comments at all? No? So just my comments added. I mean, I think before we actually be great to hear Brian's reflection on those conditions if they're feasible. But I think my reflection is clearly this application brings forward much needed housing, much needed social housing. And I think we've all been at our wits' end where we've got residents who we know are in overcrowded accommodation and we just don't have the available units in the borough to support them. And this certainly goes a long way. Bearing in mind that we do need to deliver over 1,000 homes pretty much every year to do that. And we are doing obviously good work working with developers and residents to achieve that. I think also this clearly will bring the much needed footfall for local businesses and let them to grow in a time where post-pandemic the economy is changing. I think this is the point, though, the level of uncertainty in the sense of looking to the future. And, we talked about EV before, but we do know the direction of travel. Legislation-wise, we do also know the direction of the consumer is for EV. We do know how varying factors there, but of course this build will be delivered over a longer period. So there are gateways to change that. I've heard tonight suggestions of conditions for, and no doubt John will have a separate list and point one or two I forgot, but we've got definitely EV. So we're hearing a lot on, so Brian's perspective about how do you, I think this is from more from a program perspective versus a BAU perspective, but you've got, the 20% provision currently with monitoring versus, when they come online and residents occupied, say 2030, 2035, given the direction of travel, can they not all be 100% by then? So not saying they would all be 100% tomorrow, if that makes sense. So there's a space there to discuss that. We've obviously heard a lot about informatives that we may want to place as well. So we've heard a lot of informatives about dust monitoring and management. So that will come into the full works. We've also heard informative about Caroline's property and access to those gas. Appreciate it's a legal matter, but informative may be helpful for a future committee to review that once that's come. We've also had an informative raised about the trees. Now, I've heard Brian mention that old trees are already being grown at the minute. So there doesn't appear to be a need for a condition, given one is already there. But I think definitely for future committees, we need to stick it on there so that it is part of the planning history of that. And I'm looking to colleagues, have I forgot anything else? Hands up, Susie. Oh, Swift boxes. Yep, it's always Swift boxes. So yes, Swift boxes. So that's that. My only comment on that is, do we have enough food to feed the Swifts? But that's a separate issue there. So Swift boxes. Hey, what have I missed anything out in terms of conditions?
No, Chair, I think you've covered everything.
One thing I just want to flag also, just as a modification sheet, there was page 8 where you mentioned suggestions of conditions. Are those automatic? Are those part of our planning decision tonight, have you made those decisions? Have you actually made those conditions additionally on it, or do you want us to discuss those potential conditions and then put them on it?
So, Chair, what we included within the mod sheet are sets of conditions and other applications that are currently live with us. They're not really up for determination as such, because it's down to the technical experts to determine whether the energy documents are okay, but they're kind of more about information and the guidance as what we're dealing with at the moment. If you're happy for us to deal with it, we can take that as delegated.
So essentially, in mod sheet where it says it's going to be a condition, it's it's evolving and it'll be there. Okay, have I missed anything else out at all? So why don't we move to, so I think what thing we just need to discuss is a nuance of this EV charging condition. If colleagues can just bear with me. So what would be helpful then is, it sounds like the goal is to get 100% by 2035. That's how I think the committee's understanding. I appreciate 20% is the current planning policy. What is, to make that happen, how does consumer behavior from your, or resident behavior, what would need to change to make that happen? And then we can understand that in the monitoring that would follow suit.
Well, if we're monitoring on an annual basis, whether it's formally part of the travel plan monitoring exercise, which you've already got a condition about, or whether we have this as a separate condition, I'm fairly open-minded about that. So I think it's a good idea that we have as a condition that we do monitor every year the usage of EV vehicles. And then always make sure that there is never a shortage at peak times. There should never be a single hour of any year when there is a shortage of an EV charging point. And that will mean an overcapacity for a large part of the year as we build forward. I'm not sure that 2035 is necessarily the time by which we will all have converted to EV vehicles. Isn't that the date by which you can't buy a new internal combustion engine? But obviously there's then going to be legacy vehicles. And we might be left with only 50 or 60% of our residents who are driving EV vehicles at the same time, at that point in time. So we'll be left with the same problems of potential obsolescence and high maintenance costs and potential vandalism and all the rest of it. So I think the annual monitoring is wise. And I think us committing to always be a year ahead in provision, and that can just be a technical exercise that we have a conversation with your officers about, what would be the reasonable provision to put in next year to make sure that we're always going to be ahead of the demand. I think that would work for me.
No, thank you. I think, all right, it sounds like we're getting close. So so we're addressing trying to the lag and lead on that. Mike, again, let's talk about practicalities. I'm resident, I'm moving in or want access to it. How would you suggest adapting that to enable that to happen?
Well, whether the residents notify us or notify you, we could put a formal process in place under which there is a notification method, so that I guess the difficulty is that some people don't always know in advance, and there might be spur of the moment. People go car shopping at the weekend and decide to buy an electric one rather than a combustion engine one. So we won't always get advance notice, which is why I think committing to always be at least a year ahead is probably the more flexible way. But if somebody says, particularly a disabled person who needs a particular bay in close proximity to their accommodation, if they say, I'm getting an EV vehicle, it's been delivered in 3 months' time, can you put one in? Then again, it's a no-brainer. Then yes, it goes in. So we could make a commitment to providing where there is a specific disabled bay that's allocated, to make sure it's booked in advance, if that's helpful.
Yeah, so in some reasons, and not just for disabled residents, for residents per se, but so we've got mitigations against lead and lag. So that's a yearly monitoring exercise. And in between hand, if a resident asks for it with a reasonable time frame, they'll get it. Does that colleagues happy with? Super. I think that's, if we can condition it up, that's fantastic. And what I'd like to add to that as well is, can we include that condition in the review mechanism that we take at these stages? Because technology may change and there may be suddenly an increased pace of technological adoption that we're not aware of, and we don't want to be in a situation where we aren't there. I think the only informative thing mentioned before was actually Dan's point about offices. So I don't think we're there yet at where the office will be and staff and stuff, but I think it may be helpful if we expressed our wish that it would be staffed at reasonable times and all the rest of the stuff. Brian, you're eager to say something.
Well, this development is going to represent a lot of management challenges for us, not least because of the number of owner occupiers in leased buildings, and we recognise and the work is already underway for us to come up with a very different way of managing this estate because of the mixed tenure nature of it. Owner occupiers, shared ownership owners, and social rent tenants. There may also be some private rented tenants in build to rent, or some may leak out into buy-to-let. So it's a different management challenge to our normal business as usual. So we're already in the process of coming up with an overarching business plan, management plan for the estate, which will look very different to anything that we've done to date in the borough. I mean, it's probably not a planning condition, but we will certainly share our thinking around that management plan with yourselves so that you understand what's coming.
So I'm just okay. Yeah, good.
Chair, just I actually think it's okay as a planning condition. I think we can request the submission of management plans regarding both issues to be reviewed as often as the committee like, really 6 months or annually, whatever you think's best.
Super, thank you. Okay, so let's sum this up and then move to a vote. So I think conditions boxes, they're there already, but reviewing for accessible for more. Submission of a management plan and reviewed. I think the review mechanism may be annually, given that we're not the housing, we don't manage housing, but it'd be good to understand how that is being working through. Well, I do think I'll go to informatives in a second, and then the final condition then on EV charging. It sounds like that to move the wording roughly. It sounds to move to 100% charging. We will have a monitoring exercise that will stay at least a year ahead of the lead inputs, and Clarion will have a mechanism that residents who purchase or will purchase on site can secure an appropriate EV charging unit additionally on the site to accommodate that if there is any issues there. And again, you know, we don't manage EV charges, so that will be transport to enforce that, but we do want a measure of enforcement in there. So whether that be in the 106 or whatever, that'll be part of that condition, so that moving forward, the housing department here can work with residents on that. So those are conditions. Is everyone clear on that? Super. Yeah. In terms of informatives, so informatives, Susie's expressed a concern about dust on those properties on the main road, so we want to bring that forward for full design. We've talked about Caroline's property issue about the gas meter access, so we do want to see that through. Again, appreciate separate party wall agreement. Staffing of offices, while you're developing your management plan, our preference is obviously for access outside of traditional office hours and outside of working hours, so residents who, you know, outside of 9 to 5 effectively, and maybe some time on a weekend, so that residents are supported. Appreciate this is a mega investment for you anyway, so that will be there, but this is our informative. It's a different than a condition, bearing in mind that. And I think that's it with informatives. Missed anything else, colleagues? No? Super. All right, with all that in mind, let's move to a vote. So all those voting against, please raise their hand.
None, Chair.
All those not voting?
None, Chair.
All those voting in favour?
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we can see this application passed. Thank you very much. We'll take a short break of 10 minutes just because it's super hot, and then we'll move into the next application at about 10 past 10.